All right, let's go ahead and roll in. Welcoming everyone to the call today. Um, I am Kenzie Strong. I am with ResultsLab and will be one of your guides for today's conversation. The fact that you all are here says a lot. I know there's a lot shaking in everyone's worlds, everyone's communities right now, and the fact that you really want to take this moment, lean in a little bit deeper as we think about outcomes, says a lot about who you are as a Y and who and where your organization will be going or will continue to go. I want to just set the stage for a moment of what the conversation is going to look like and feel like, and then we'll drop right in. So we are going to spend a little bit of space first, kind of at the highest level, just thinking about like why does outcome-driven focus really matter right now? We'll talk a little bit about what the journey for an outcomes-driven practice really can look like, feel like. We'll be bringing in some of our best practice wisdom into that space. And then we know kind of the best way to bring this to life is when you actually do it. And many of you are already walking this journey. Today, you'll have the opportunity to hear from Kate from the YMCA of Cincinnati, who will be sharing some of the lessons learned that they've gained, but we're also going to really open this up deeply into a space of conversation to be hearing from you all in terms of where you're grappling with, where you're seeing opportunities. More than anything, we do want this to feel like a conversation today. While we'll have some guiding framing, we want to ensure that we're leaning in on what is feeling most compelling to where you're sitting right now and where you are in the journey. So that said, Kate, if you want to click us forward, just a kind of a quick point of kind of framing of who we are and why we've decided to join the conversation today. So as I mentioned, Kenzie Strong with ResultsLab. ResultsLab is an organization that we work across the spectrum of nonprofits and really helping organizations to bring data to life. That's our main mission, to make sure that what you're collecting is really going to drive transformation in your community and for your wide. Jorge and Kate will be joining a conversation today to really bring their practice wisdom to play. And I'm seeing a lot more people kind of jump in the call, which I love to see. I'd love just to take a moment now to check in with you all. If you don't mind just dropping in chat who you are, your organization and location. And then if you can add one more thought for today's introduction. And that's as you think about your why or your organization, what do you think the most meaningful outcome is for your organization, or that most meaningful change that you're really trying to seek to achieve? So if you don't mind just dropping in chat, this will be a great way for us to get pulse of who's with us. Wonderful. I'm seeing some introductions coming through already, comments already coming in around belonging, around actually looking at how we can serve more or scale our practices and services. I see Emily coming in strong with achievement, belonging, and character. Oh, I love it. You can't choose because they're all important. I feel you there. Engaging more people, impact on the community more broadly. Great. Well, welcome to each of you. Keep the intros coming through. Serving our community and making a bigger impact on people's lives from Sherwood. Welcome, Sherwood. Great to have you here. Awesome. Well, let's. I'm going to turn over to you, Jorge, to kind of really bring us up to think about why this even matters right now. Oh, Jorge, you are muted. I knew you were saying something incredibly compelling.
Somebody muted me, and so
sorry about that.
So now it's helpful if I start with the YMCA's background, and that is that the YMCA, we have so many activities that are going on. Part of our challenge at the Y is we have kids in water, kids in cribs, kids on horses, and we have seniors, and we have Zumba classes and so forth and so on. And trying to tie all of this stuff together in a cohesive message becomes really difficult. And trying to measure outcomes becomes difficult because we're measuring so many different things. And so part of the reason this is important is trying to make sure that the organization is kind of moving towards a particular direction, and trying to do that with all of those programs I just described. Secondly, trying to ensure that when we go out in the community and we say to individuals, here's what the YMCA is about, that we have a narrative that ties all of those different perceptions of what people think of when they think of the YMCA, the old gym and swim mantra, trying to figure out to say to them, yes, we do those things, but our intent is this, and tying all of that stuff together. And then finally, as we go out and make our case as a nonprofit, trying to get individuals to support us and even join us, that they understand what it is that they're supporting and what they're joining. And I think it became super important as we try to give direction to the organization. And it began to, this whole conversation began to beg the question is, how does it all tie together with our strategic plan? You actually have on the screen the mountain that we refer to as our strategic direction. And this strategy, and you can see our intent around achievement, relation, belonging built into the vision statement, to build inclusive and joyful environment where individuals can reach goals. There's achievement. Make friends, there's relationship, and connect to a cause greater than themselves, that's belonging. And you'll see that those words appear in the impact. When we talk about amplifying and formalizing our Y factor, that's around achievement, relationship, and belonging. You see that in the parentheses, ARB. And so it became our through line through our entire organization. And so when we talk about what we're doing with infants in cribs, or kids on horses, or seniors in classes, it's about achievement, relationship, and belonging. The next slide demonstrates why this is important. When we were doing the research around achievement, relation, belonging, and whether they really did drive not just our impact, but our business, the answer was yes. When we looked at members that were achieving, relating, and belonging, their NPS scores were higher. They were 2 times more likely to volunteer. They gave more money, and they were retained longer. And this is not surprising, right? If somebody is reaching goals, finding a community of friends, and finding purpose, then it's just logical to think that those individuals are going to build a different kind of relationship with the YMCA that is more than just consumers. And that is exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to establish purpose and direction for our team and ensure that we were marching towards an impact, not towards a transaction.
Thank you, Jorge. I also will add, I think there's a lot of, as there's a lot of funding shifts going on in the field right now and kind of questions, this ability to really hone in on outcomes right now becomes so compelling and so important, as Jorge mentioned, to be able to kind of translate that into new funding opportunities, but also to kind of hone in on what is making the biggest difference in what you do, because your resources may be more finite right now. Right. And so really being able to kind of narrow in on what is most essential.
Yeah, 100%. I would tell you that as we are making decisions internally because of that mountain, we're not just asking, does it make enough money? We're also asking which of these have the greatest impact, because we're tracking this stuff. as we'll learn here in a little bit, we've been on this journey to create the infrastructure to track achievement, relation, belonging.
So if that's the big why, the big WHY, I want to just speak a little bit to the, like, what might this journey look like? And as I called out earlier, I believe every single one of you are somewhere on the journey. Some of you may be just beginning and others may be pretty far along. And I would say every organization we've ever worked with, it's always going to be a journey, right? There's always elements of like kind of figuring out what is that most important next step. So I just want to kind of share with you really 9 steps that I would call out of like what when we say becoming outcomes driven, what we actually mean and what it incorporates. ResultsLab uses a framework called Align, Capture, and Transform to really kind of encompass how to move from an organization that might just collect data or collect information to being an organization that truly iterates and uses data to drive change. So kind of always starting or at some point always coming back to what we call the align phase. This is really making sure you've got that clarity on what does change look like for you. So many of you have already dropped in points of clarity. It's also very cool to see the YMCA as a network continuing to evolve and get tighter and tighter on what some of those outcomes are for you all. And hearing kind of that common thread of achievement, relationship, belonging is really strong coming forward. So getting really clear on what are those outcomes you're trying to manifest, what are the services and approaches that will lead you to those, and who specifically are you trying to make change with or change through. So that's really the align phase. Some of you may kind of hear this packaged into things like theories of change, logic models. We refer to it as an impact strategy, really kind of thinking about having that tightly framed plan, truly, of how change is going to happen for your organization. That also becomes the anchor of what you're going to collect data on, right? It's often really easy to kind of start like just kind of grabbing of like, well, what are the right data metrics to be looking at? What are some tools I might be grabbing? Often what that leads to is a huge list of data points that you collect that you may not actually need to use. Most organizations we work with and talk to have less of the issue of not having enough data, but more of the issue of having too much that's just really not serving your organization. So that's really what the capture phase is about, getting really clear on what are those right key performance indicators for your organization. Jorge just showed us kind of some framing of what that's looking like at the Y of Cincinnati. One of the things that's really most important here, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, is making sure that we are moving from just output indicators to truly some of the change indicators that sit in the outcome space. The right tools and practices to make sure you're bringing this data forward. I had the opportunity to work with Kate and Jorge almost for a year, kind of digging into their practice. And I was surprised to see how many tools do exist across the Y network, right? And many of you are required to use these tools for different reasons, partnerships, funding, and some of them are, commonly used tools. So knowing that there's a lot of tools out there, the question is, how do you right size these in ways that are going to really support you? Systems and staff is another huge part of this. Kate will talk a lot more about this, but how critical that is to really ensure that you are in a strong flow of organizing and analyzing and using your data. And then lastly, I think a lot of organizations stop right here and they're like, great, data's flowing, but the most important phase here is that transform phase to make sure that you're bringing that data to life so it's actually serving you. So tools like dashboards or other communication tools to make sure it's like a pulse for you on a regular basis, that you're looking at it, you're sharing it, you're reflecting on it. The other thing that I'll add in here is step 8 or element 8 is this like idea of systematic data reviews. We all need the reflection and the conversation to bring the data to life and to look at like what changes we're going to make based on the data. You'll hear a little bit more from Kate on that too. And then finally, and many of you are representing this today, is leadership, right? Leadership has got to model this from the top and from the top down, and making sure that they're modeling data-informed decision making. So these are the 9 elements that we believe are really the strong ingredients for becoming a strong outcome-driven organization. And I'd love to take a pause here. Maybe if you flip us back here, and just to hear from you guys, if you look at these 9, maybe let's first start with which of these do you think are your strengths? Just drop the corresponding number in chat just so we can get a pulse on where you feel like strengths are in practice. And if there's any questions, don't hesitate to drop those in as well. Absolutely. Feel free to unmute if that's an easier way to communicate today. We'll take all kinds. Cool. Okay, so numbers are flowing in. We're seeing actually quite a bit of things in the align phase coming through, from like clarity on who you serve, what your approach is, services. Great, interesting. I'm not seeing any outcomes coming in yet, but Sherwood flagging also clarity on key performance indicators. Jean-Luc 3, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, across the board. Love seeing that. Very good. Okay. So absolutely, I mean, we're all starting with some really strong assets, strengths that we want to continue to propel. I'm going to ask the same flip of the question. When you look at this list, what do you feel like is the kind of greatest pain point for you right now, or like weakest area that you just haven't really been able to build out? Okay, so the numbers are starting to get higher, lower on the continuum here. 6 and 7, systems and staff, that one doesn't surprise me at all. That's very common. 4 to 8 for Eric, noted. Okay. Leadership is often a hard one to really kind of see that modeling coming from the top. Quality tools and practices, I see Jill coming in with that one. That is also, that for us, that's commonly a place that folks in our conversation to say like, hey, we do not know how to actually, what are the right tools and practices to do this in a meaningful way without extracting things from community or without overburdening community. Okay. Kate, if you do want to take us to the next slide, when you guys registered, we did ask you what are your data pain points, and I just kind of put them up here for us to bring those to life a little bit more. And I'd love to, maybe if one or two of you want to unmute and just share a little bit more about what you feel like is your greatest point of grappling. A couple of things I'll note here that have come to life already include this output versus outcome question of really how do we think about not only the relationship, but how do we start thinking more about those outcomes? And I know this is especially kind of part of the journey of the why, right? Because you guys have been able to really lean on outputs for a long time. I thought the other thing I found interesting here was the underused storytelling coming through. That you know, in your model, it's very natural for you to be able to like tap into stories and hear overhear stories, but how those can truly become a threaded part of your meaningful data practice. I'd love to just hear from you all. Does anyone want to just share a little bit more about maybe one of the numbers you picked and what's behind it?
This is Sherwood from Goodwill. I do like the point about outputs and outcomes. I don't know if I put exactly that number down, but I mean, that's something that we're challenged on. We know our output, we have numbers, but we don't have the outcome, like how, and actually that's something we're challenged at from our representatives. Like, well, if we want to put more money towards programs, if we want to do stuff, that's great that you have numbers, but like, what is the true outcome? Like, what if they go back and, something else happens and recidivism or anything else? It's like, okay, so you helped as many people and we capture the number of people, but what is their real journey like, and how can we have proof back to our representatives that these programs that they're helping to support or whatever we're doing is actually leading to true transformation? Like, yes, there could be moments of transformation, but how are we paying that out going forward?
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing, Sherwood. Yeah, yeah, and even outcomes in their own is their own journey, right? There is some like as you think about some of those early term outcomes versus some of the longer terms like recidivism as maybe even being a point of like longer term impact that you might be wanting to see. But yeah, I definitely hear you around how do we really ensure we can wrap meaningful data practice around that. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Any other struggles folks want to bring to light? All right, well, don't hesitate. Feel free to keep them rolling in whatever form. Kate, if you do want to take us to the next slide, I think this is relevant to even Sherwood's comment around like, this is the only other framework I want to show you guys today. And this is just that data practice continuum and seeing kind of that like that natural flow where many organizations do tend to start their journey in what we call anecdotal reporting or stories. And while stories are amazing and impactful, when they're just one-off, they really don't have that deeper kind of traction and really ability to help you understand how change is truly manifesting. And then moving to that output place, which is typically, of course, where we're counting the number of people served. You may be getting into aspects of quality of your workshops, or even as Jorge shared earlier, like could be your net promoter score coming into life, right? Which is a kind of aggregate of your quality coming into play. So again, output's important, but when it's only outputs, it's not enough. And to Sherwood's comments, you want to make sure you're translating that into the outcome space. And that outcome space is really looking at, it's the change, right? It's the so what of what you're doing. You'll often see kind of elements of outcomes coming to life. It could be changes in that knowledge, attitude, skills, practice, or behaviors start to become some of those longer term outcomes. Achievement, relationship, belonging fit right in there as you think about some of those changes from, you know, the efficacy of an individual going through or experiencing the why to some of those achievements that they're able to engage through. And then finally, impact. I would say this is, I like to call this one out, but this is often a space that most nonprofits are not measuring change in, and that is absolutely okay. You can look for, like, I think it's important to call out what that ultimate impact is. And sure, for you, in your case, it could, like, recidivism could be sitting in that, like, longer term impact that you're looking at. Maybe it's a mid to long term outcome, but looking for opportunities to really show research and how that thread can come to life for the impact. There are some organizations that may decide, or you all as a Y, as a collective, may decide, hey, we want to all come together into a broader research study, right? Which is an opportunity to bring some of that impact forward. But I think the sweet spot here and really today's conversation is around that outcome piece. We know many of you are in the first two buckets very naturally. How do we start to lift up the focus on outcomes in a more meaningful way, in a more practical way? So I'd love to just take another pulse here from the crew as you look at this continuum, where, like, which of these you feel like is pretty much like your highest level that you are sitting in and reporting on and capturing data in right now? Feel free to drop it in or unmute. It's helpful to get a pulse here. It looks like a lot coming in at the output level, maybe a blend of anecdotes and outputs. Okay. And I think what's really powerful as you think about this continuum is, at the end of the day, how do you get to a point where you can actually braid your stories with your outputs and your outcomes all together, so you really have that compelling, like, element of what difference you're making for communication, but also for internal conversation around, like, what you need to improve. I'd love just to kind of take one other reflection here as we think about that outcome. So outcomes will be aspirational for many of us. If you were to really hone in on, like, one outcome that you really want to be able to prove out or collect data on now in your journey, what might that outcome be? And it could be the outcome you opened us up with, or maybe there's something else you're really kind of wanting to hone in on in terms of measurement of outcomes? And feel free, maybe if someone wants to unmute on this one and just share with us kind of what would be an ideal outcome to really get some measure around.
I can talk. This is Emily from the YMCA of Dallas. I think for us, we really want to be able to track sense of belonging across our programs, across membership, across everything we do, but trying to find like an actual, I don't know what's the word, the scientific way to do that, that's actually meaningful instead of just an arbitrary question that asks like, do you feel a sense of belonging? Like, is that really measuring what we wanted to measure? So just figuring out how to operationalize it, I think, is our challenge there.
Anyone on that note, anyone on the call measuring this already that wants to share kind of what they're doing on this front? Oh, cool. Jean-Luc, you're coming in with this. And Jean-Luc, is that specific to belonging or more broadly that you're speaking to?
Definitely applicable to a wide-ranging like number of programs that are, it could be belonging. Some of the projects we implement are like in schools, which is where the sense of belonging rate comes up. And we could have like a baseline, a percentage of where things were pre-intervention and an end line touch point to see where things ultimately ended up after intervention, and then compare between the two if there's like any movement in a certain direction.
Love it. Yeah, I think that's a strong way to get at some of the incremental changes over time. That's great. You're getting a lot of hearts coming in here. I want to leave us. So I feel that, you know, as a Y, you guys have an incredible opportunity to continue to look at how folks are addressing different points of measurement, because you all are largely focused on many of the same outcomes. I think we're going to have the opportunity to hear a little bit more on what this is looking like in the Cincinnati case. But before we do that, I do want to just kind of share a few final reflections as we think just broadly about how to walk this journey. Because sometimes it can feel overwhelming around like, where do I even want to begin? So Kate, if you don't mind just dropping us to this next slide. I've got kind of three things I want to just elevate for you guys. One is just start small and focus. So for those of you who are sitting at a place where outputs are pretty much your focus right now, I would really encourage you to think about like, maybe it's just one outcome, or maybe there's two or three that you want to really say, hey, this is where I want to start tackling. I largely don't recommend, you know, there's a lot of outcomes you could be measuring within the Y network. It can be overwhelming to try to capture all of them. So really hone in on what is most strategic, what is most important, and go deeper. And for many of you, it may be that achievement relationship belonging as that first point of frame. Finding those easy wins, I think oftentimes, especially if you're an organization that you already have quite a few tools that are out there. So one example with Cincinnati, what we looked at is we looked at even the Listen 360. This is a survey that's already going out to, you know, many of your members. And so to say, hey, are there pieces we want to add into that to better understand some of these reflections on, you know, things like achievement, relationship, belonging? That is one data source, right? That is one way to easily integrate it in. Other things for easy wins to really think about is whether you are already required to be engaging in a certain tool. So if you're in the early learning space, for example, you may be already engaged with the TS Gold as a tool to understand early learning readiness. So if you're already kind of tapped into certain data sources that may be secondary, think about how you can be leveraging those to be threading into your story and to your internal understanding of outcomes. And then my last piece that I'll leave you with, and I think Kate is also going to go a little deeper here, is change will not happen unless you intentionally build it into your practice. And so really think about, like, again, it could be back to that like one outcome. You could say, hey, in the next year, we're going to take one unique focus in on belonging. And you're going to build in those systems. You know, it could be like a quarterly reflection and review with your team, where you're reflecting on what you've heard, what you've seen, looking at the data together around that to really ensure you're starting to kind of build that muscle and that practice around data review. So that transform is coming to life. So we will have time in a little while for questions. So keep those thoughts coming. I would like to turn it over to you, Kate, to get us a little bit deeper of like, what does this look like and feel like as you all walk the journey? And if you're talking, you are muted.
Kate, you're still on mute.
Okay. Am I unmuted now?
You're good.
You would think this is the first time I've gotten this, you guys. You know, I'm having a day with it, okay? Let's see here. So view, slideshow. All right. Thanks all for your patience. You can hear me and you can see, correct? Yes? Okay. So
we don't see slides though.
You don't see slides though, right? Guys, really? Almost there. We're coming, we're getting it. Share content.
Jorge, did you want to say, I saw your hand go up for a moment. Did you want to say something while she pulls up slides?
I just wanted to emphasize, and this came out through the in the chat, the tying together of what I want to measure and what activity we want it to do. That's where the challenge is. So if you want to measure belonging, then you have to actually do belonging.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to measure relationships, then you have to do relationships. And that's what makes this complicated, is that, you know, we're at the YMCA starting to measure things like, and we've defined belonging a certain way. We're measuring belonging by looking at the activities and the experiences of individuals. And a simple example of that is in the achievement, we're not just asking our members, hey, are we helping you meet your goals? Because they'll say yes, and they'll say it at a high rate. But then we take a look at how many of our members are actually coming twice a week or more, and we're measuring that too, as a backstop to the question of achievement, because we know you can't achieve goals, you can't lose those 10 pounds, you can't get your health in order if you're not showing up. You certainly can't build relationships if you're not at the YMCA either. So we look at what we're measuring, and then we're looking to see if we're creating the experiences that support achievement, relationship, belonging, and lining those two things up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jorge. And that really sort of tees up in terms of, we have learned so many lessons in terms of this work, and we've learned by failing and doing and undoing. And so I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to share that is here with you. Please interrupt me at any point. If I don't see it in the chat, let me know. But I look forward to answering any questions you might have afterwards. Particularly, I know we have probably representatives here from larger Ys, smaller Ys, organizations that are not YMCA. So if there's something specific to your context, we really want to know. So I'm just going to go through 3 lessons to get there. The first is really to make the case and resource it. So this has to do with leadership alignment. You can measure, try and measure outcomes all day, but if folks, including your board and your decision makers, aren't really doing this work or don't understand why you're asking for more resources to do it, you're going to be hitting your head against the wall the whole time. And so what the case is that outcome measurement does 2 things really well. One, it makes sure that we have mission integrity. So we claim a mission, but if a donor tries to dig any deeper beyond a swim lesson, maybe if we're counting swim lessons, for example, and a donor asks, Well, how do you know they enjoyed the swim lesson? How do you know how they felt? How do you know the outcome? And if we don't have that, it really hurts our brand integrity as an organization. And then the second is that when we have that outcome measurement, and then we're able to come to donors, to come to philanthropy and say, look at this. This is why we, in addition to offering swim lessons and childcare, this is the bigger outcome we're making in society. So you have to sort of make the case for it, and then also make sure you resource it. So the second piece of that is to build outcome measurement alongside financial and operations measurement. And this may be more specific to our Y people, and I come from outside the Y, but in my experience, the Y is really good at measuring two things. One is our financial data. We really want to make sure we're doing that well. And this is because we have a brilliant history of being a social enterprise and having this diverse funding portfolio that really helps us stay have longevity. However, sometimes we just stop here in terms of what we measure. And then operations might be the number of fitness classes, number of kids in daycare, et cetera. But the third piece of that stool is impact. And again, for those of you in the YMCA, YUSA just announced yesterday, I was in a call where they're going to start, when we think about operational excellence, we're going to think about it in these three buckets: operations, finance, and now impact. And so investing in this now will really help align as well to the national trend and the movement where we're going. So what are some actions you can do to do that? First is identify an outcome across the whole. I think Jorge and Kenzie really spoke to this. It's really helpful. If it can stem directly from your vision or mission, but it also can be something simple like, did people experience joy when they came here, right? So just one thing that could be true across the whole, and start small. I love that, Kenzie, you said that. Ideally, if you can elevate it into your strategic plan, this is just a way that if whatever you're measuring is also part of your strategy and ideally tied to your vision and mission, it helps to create that alignment and buy-in from the whole organization, versus if you're measuring something over here and then you're fighting against the big system to try and have it hear you. And the last is resourcing the work. Now, this might not be available for everyone, but if possible, dedicating someone's time to it or repositioning someone's time to it, knowing that it pays off in the back end. So it's hard. It's an investment in it's a long-term strategy. And the role if you're in CEO or boards particularly, is to emphasize why it's crucial and what success looks like. And so an example here for us is we started this work with ResultsLab. We really started it before then, when Jorge set our vision around achievement, relationship, and belonging, and ensured that our board was on board for that vision. But as Kenzie said delicately and lovely, I think we had, I don't know, 27 different data systems that we were capturing, and we were defining achievement, relationship, and belonging in a million different ways. And some of us were measuring it and some of it weren't. And so it was super helpful to work with ResultsLab to really help us in terms of understanding what we can all share in common while keeping our individual departmental unique nature, and helping us figure out how we could measure that. So that was super helpful, but that was just really the beginning of our measurement journey. The second thing we did was we hired a person for the role who's a lovely person who we learned the hard way wasn't the right person for this work. And so that took us some time. And we found another third person who was able to do that work. If any of you know Cody Sarko-Polner in our movement, he's a wonderful human being, but he's had to teach himself a lot, right? Because it's not like, well, there's a ton of people coming out of universities with a degree in nonprofit outcome measurement. So it really have to invest in someone's time to learn how to do this. And lastly, we invested in using Power BI and dashboards to really help us figure out how to tell the story in the most efficient and effective ways. The second lesson I would say is to truly engage stakeholders. This is, I think in general, best practice in terms of any activity, outcome measurement being just one of them. But it not only does it improve buy-in, of course, from staff members, but it improves the accuracy of the measurements and tools themselves. That's one of the things we loved about working with ResultsLab, is that we had 4 teams across the organization working at a time, and we worked in teams, and those people were the people on the front lines, the ones having to do the data measurement, having to do the gathering in the middle of their busy day, right? And so what you don't want is some top-down approach where you ask people that are already strapped and overcommitted to do more. So it has to come from what they need, what they're capable of doing, what they're capable of capturing. And so a couple of actions there is to go beyond surveys. In our work with ResultsLab, it was a process that we worked on in a year in teams. We met in person, we met on Zoom, we had teams, and it was an ongoing conversation that wasn't just us asking them in a survey in an impersonal way. Also allowing them to see themselves as part of the entire process. So again, not just extracting information from frontline workers or from community members one time, but actually inviting them into the process, the design process of what you're measuring. And even funders, I will say that in my experience, funders and donors have empathy for how hard it is to capture some of this stuff and want to actually be with you on that journey and can support you in that process. And then the last is involve more than once, which is part of articulating the entire process. And then the role of the CEO here in particular in governance is to just plan and resource the time it takes for that. Being patient. Like I said, I get back to that slide with the 4 squares on it. I mean, we are in year 3 and finally now able to show full dashboards with alignment across the organization. But that took us, I would say, 3 full years of work. And so be patient with yourself, I would say. And here's just a picture of one of our sessions with staff members. And another thing I want to say here that's important is not just to engage frontline workers within a silo, but to engage cross silos. So here we've got someone that is one of our business analysts who works from a financial perspective, someone that works in fitness, someone that works at a front desk, and someone that works in childcare sitting at the same table together. One of the things we have at the YMCA in particular, and even in any large organization, is you've got departmental silos. And it helped us get to that seeing ourselves as part of a whole team when we broke those silos at certain points and put people together across those differences. And our last thing that I'm going to share here before we're going to open it up for some questions is commit to closing the loop. And this is like when we take the time to loop back and share our results, the good, the bad, and the ugly, it actually helps us deepen trust, uncover new ideas, and secure increased funding and partnership. So actions there are data use sessions and storytelling. I wasn't familiar with the term data use sessions until we worked with ResultsLab, and this has been something that really stuck with us from our partnership with ResultsLab, in that what we do is now that we collect the data, we don't just collect it once a year and then it sits in Cody's one person's department and then they analyze it. And we don't just use it to put fluffy newsletter pieces or grants, which those are important too, but we use it with integrity with ourselves. So Cody does something 4 times a year. He goes to every branch and they pull up their results, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And what's really important is we disaggregate those demographically. So we can disaggregate those by age, race, income level, et cetera. And that really allows us to make sure not only are people experiencing things the way we want them to experience it, but is everyone doing it at an equal level? Or there's certain populations that aren't getting that same experience level. And so here the role of CEO or board is to create moments of engaged curiosity over judgment from afar, right? It's easy for particularly board members to peer in and say, well, why is that number what it is, right? And so flipping that to curiosity and saying, why are the numbers what they are? I wonder why. I'm curious about that. And digging in with your team and let's say, let's look at it. Let's investigate together. And that tone creates, because outcome measurement can create a culture of, because it's increased monitoring, what you don't want is your staff to feel alienated or pressured, right? You want to make a culture of failure and a culture of open data and transparency normalized. And that has to be ideally represented from the highest level of the organization. So here's an example, and I think this is going to play right, although you guys know I'm not having the best tech day as you've seen so far. But this is just a video of and it's quiet, so you're not going to hear any sound, but I just want you to see. Now, this is, again, took us 3 years and to get to this point. But what's really cool about if you want to know about Power BI, I'll connect you to my colleague Cody. But you can see here sort of the capability. This is just silent he's going through. So he can sort now by location. Or here's our overall achievement, relationships, and belonging scores. He can sort by people's ethnicities, backgrounds, income. And so we can really now understand from an outcome perspective how we're doing. But please don't be intimidated. Like I said, this took us 3 years. And even if you're a small Y or a small organization, you can start with one and get it won't take you 3 years because it won't be as big to move the needle. So hopefully this gives you some idea of what we're talking about. And those are my last 3 things. Yeah, make the case and resource it, truly engage stakeholders, and commit to closing the loop. So hopefully that was the right amount of time, Kenzie, and we've got some time left for questions or comments that folks have. I'd love to hear what this journey even has been like for you as you've moved through it. Oh, and I'm going to stop sharing. So right, Kenzie, is that what you'd prefer?
Yeah, that's perfect. Love to see everyone. And yeah, feel free at this point, open up, unmute, and any reflections, questions that this is sparking for you. We'd love to hear from you.
While we wait for that, one thing I wanted to say, I didn't catch who my colleague was from Dallas who asked about belonging and how to define it. But I just will say that don't reinvent that wheel. We got to partner with the National Children's Hospital on defining it through a research-based thing. It took us a long time, and would love to give you that so you can just don't have to redo that from scratch, because I hear you, and it's tough. So feel free to reach out and I can connect you with more info there.
Thank you. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, no, I know, right? Yeah. Because you don't want to just make up some word and definition, and there's actually lots of different ways to consider it. So we had to run focus groups for a year across all different ages and things to be able to identify that and do. What's nice is we had an outside research hospital do that for us, so it's validated. So it's not just the why self-reporting, like, aren't we so great? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I'm afraid of. I want it to be valid, whatever we're measuring. And I don't have a question. I just have to say thank you. And you guys give me hope, because that is the direction we want to go. Like, we have Power BI dashboards for all of our outputs, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to work on getting them for all of our outcomes and aligning them all together. And we're working with a third party as well right now. So this is really exciting. And thank you so much for sharing.
Cool. Yeah, great.
Emily, that's a big part of the journey. Even getting those outputs stuff from Power BI and getting that practice built in with your team. I feel like you're a big step in. So that's awesome.
So we have talked a lot about trying to line it up with the strategic plan and the leader of the organization, and so forth and so on. And inevitably, somebody will ask the question, "But what if I can't?" And here's what I'll say is, in my journey with the YMCA for the last 30 years, the outcomes that people were asking of me, or the outputs that people were asking of me, I could measure those. Those were easy. Those were budgets. Those were numbers. And I personally began to say, well, what if I can create outcomes that are not super disruptive, that are asking things like, how did grades improved, or how did the kids do better in social emotional learning in our programs? The achievement, relation, belonging was born out of, and I put this in the quote, out of our long-standing work with the 9 dimensions of well-being, and the realization that out of those 9, 3 were heroes. And achievement, relationship, and belonging popped out for both youth and adults. And I seized and I said, oh my gosh, a measurement I could do across the entire organization in every program. And but you don't have to, ideally you want it baked into the strategic plan. You don't have to wait until that happens to start measuring the impact that you want to have in the lives of people. And I would tell you that it's the programmatic outcomes that ultimately made the case for why it needed to be inserted into the strategy of the organization.
You just mentioned that you have the 3 things that you can measure across all the YMCA. So belonging, did you have to define what you were measuring for belonging, within, if you're a person working out and going to swim versus the people in your programs? I was just thinking we have the same thing, what happens in our stores It could feel a lot different than what's happening in our programs, but finding a way to
Yeah.
define it or experience it in a different context, I guess.
Sure, that's a really good question. And we had a lot of the same questions when we started around particularly belonging, because it's such a sort of big word and it can mean a lot of different things. So we did this kind of it'd be a separate presentation, but the highlights of it is that we worked with communities and researchers to identify 5 different ways that belonging can be defined in general by our members. So it wasn't just us. We weren't even allowed in the room. So that was our members actually defining it. And based on best practice research. And I'm happy to go into that. That being said, we have to just have one. We actually ask all 5 at one point in a year. We have a deeper impact survey, but we also had to align on one question that we ask in a pulse survey. And for us, it was, I feel safe. So that was decided by our community, which was, I feel safe to be my true and authentic self. And ideally, we want that to be occurring whether you're in a swim lesson or a childcare, right? I feel safe to be me. Sometimes we talk a lot about belonging and we also talk about as connecting to something greater than myself, which is another way people think about belonging. And we've started to capture that through the idea of community, right? But we know that we can't feel connected to a group that's greater than ourselves unless we first feel safe to be who we are. And so, and I'd be happy to send you more information about this work that was validated by Children's Hospital, but just off the cuff, I would measure, do I feel safe to be my true and authentic self as a best practice standard? So that's not just, that was through a lot of research and stuff.
I mean, I would only add that part of the process, and this goes back to our engagement with ResultsLab, to try to hone in, because we, as nonprofit leaders, will tend to measure a bunch of stuff, whether it's retention rates for members or the Devereaux assessment for kids. The question at some point is we've got to hone in on a handful of things and lean in. It may not be the right thing. It just needs to be a thing. So you notice that Kate didn't say, these are the 17 questions we asked around belonging. It was one question. And really then work to move the organization in such a way that it says, how do we get that number from 75 to 85? And how do we get all of the individuals to measure achievement, relationship, and belonging at the 70th percentile across the entire organization? So that, again, we kind of start moving away from just simply measuring activity to measuring impact, and the willingness to adjust those things as we move forward. But what we have found is that it has really disciplined our organizations to focus on how they deliver programs, because they know we're measuring a certain thing. And I'll be very specific. During the staff rally, when we were training our summer campers, our camp directors this last year, I went and welcomed them like I always do. There are 300 camp counselors that were being trained. And one of the individuals came up to me and goes, you want to know what we're doing for belonging at camp? I said, what? I said, we're going to say to every kid every week and as often as we can, you belong here. We didn't have to train that. We didn't have to ask anybody to do it. And my first reaction was, man, they did that on their own. And I'm wondering if it's going to move that needle that Kate mentioned about. And so that's what you want, is you want to move from, we had 100 kids last summer, we have 110 kids this summer. We made this much money last summer, we made this much money this summer. You want to move from that being your only measurements to, and we had this belonging score last summer, and now look at what it is.
One quick add-on to that, I think for YMCAs, even Sherwood, as I think about, I used to work with Goodwills in Colorado as well. You know, for organizations that have a lot of different types of outcomes across different programs, it can feel hard to find that space of alignment, right? As a team, like where's our cohesion? Where's our like shared story together? And I think that kind of back to like the belonging as an example, to be able to have that thread, no matter what site, no matter what data collection, like pulse and tool you're using, that you're asking it at every point, it can be I've seen it be a really like aligning force from a team cohesion space as well.
Yeah, I love the example Jorge just gave. Like you belong here. Like sometimes you just need to hear that, but I could see that you could say that anywhere to like in the programs or at the pool.
I would also add Kate's comment when she showed that picture of those staff members from the different silos in our system, all sitting together talking about the same thing. So the fitness instructors and the after school people and the folks that work with seniors, all talking about the same thing. That, at least in the YMCA world, just doesn't happen. But it was happening because we had a common thread.
Yeah. Very cool.
Emily, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I have a question about that, about getting everybody together. Logistically, how did you do that? Because we're so spread out. Everybody's so busy. I can't think of a way we could do that realistically, and I'm just wondering how y'all did it.
Yeah. Well, it would help to have ResultsLab coming in. So it gave us sort of I mean, to be honest, the core reason we were able to do it is because of Jorge's leadership from the top level saying this is the vision of the organization. So initially that's part of it, right? And that's why, I mean, if you can tie the outcome to the vision or to a strategy, then you've immediately should be able to have some buy-in. That's what helping those languages match is helpful. So that's part of it. And then I would say making an investment in ResultsLab, when you make an investment in something, you want to make it nice and keep it nice and do it right. So that's part of it, was like saying we're like putting our stake in the sand and saying we're going to invest in this. And then thirdly, we did meetings over Zoom. We met in person twice, I think, over a year, and then did it in Zoom, and we did it in Teams. And Kenzie was really great to work with, so she would meet with the teams separately. So we did childcare, seniors, membership, or MFA, and we did after school versus early learning. And so those were 4 different, we had them working in teams. And so a lot of the times they were just working with their team, and then we would come together, I think probably Zoom like 3 or 4 times, and then in person twice. And then still we go to like, even in when I was talking about the data use sessions where Cody goes to them, he goes to the branch, he'll go sit with the child care team. So part of it is, and that's why it takes humans that have time carved out, which is why you need leadership buy-in, right? And that's why you have to make the case in the first place so that you get that buy-in, especially if you're in a large system. If you're in a smaller org, again, you're wearing too many hats, and it's equally hard, but for different reasons. But I would say that's why I think it requires all those different steps in the ladder. I don't know if that's helpful, Emily.
I would add that you look, because of the alignment, at some point, you look for places where people are already gathered. If your program cabinets are gathered, you don't separate them out and say, okay, the youth sports people go over there, and the after school people go over there, and this Group X people go over there. You keep them all in the room and say, we're going to talk about achievement, relation, belonging across the entire, much like you do with child abuse prevention or slips, trips, and falls, or all of those things that you do across the entire system. You also, at least for those of you that wear the hat of advancing this work, you want to show up where they've already gathered. At every YMCA, there's 1 or 2 times a year where the entire staff gather on a Saturday. Show up there and talk about that. Just like you talk about benefits at those meetings, you show up and talk about the impact and celebrate the good work that YMCA is doing and how this stuff is tied together. And then in that setting, sit them together. Sit the senior person and the after school program and the early childhood education person, put them in a group and say, can you guys all talk about how in your programs achievement gets accomplished? once the language starts getting, through, I think you begin to see some correlations and people begin to lean on each other in terms of how they do that. But I agree with Kate. At some point, you have to make some investments, but there are moments right now people are gathering. You take advantage of those moments.
Great point. Leal, I know we're at the top of the hour already. So I want to respect everyone's space today. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for kind of taking a step out of your busy day to join the conversation. I want to thank Jorge and Kate for sharing your experience as well. That's where the gold is in terms of folks who have already walked this journey or are walking the journey. I encourage you all as you step out today, kind of a few lingering things. One, I hope you can kind of take some space with this and think about like just one step you want to take forward. It doesn't have to be a huge leap. It could be a small step, but just find your own way to take that next step forward, whether it was some of the reflections that Kate shared or some of the kind of key steps that I was able to orientate in the 9-step journey. As part of that, we know community is really important and support is really important. So encourage you guys to lean into your fellow Ys, your fellow kind of partner organizations, and also know ResultsLab is here as a partner as well. If this is something that you're like, I'd love to learn a little bit more, reach out to me. Maybe Jackie, you can drop my contact in the link here. Happy to have just a consult with you guys just to kind of figure out where you're at and what you may need more personally as you move forward. Lastly, we have also recorded today's conversation, so we'll share this with you all. So if there's others in your organization that you're like, ooh, they probably could have heard something here too, feel free to share it with them as another step forward as you're thinking about kind of making the case for team members. All right. Well, thank you much, and thank you for all that you guys do.
Good to see you all.
Be well, everyone.
Thank you.